The War of the Spanish Succession, which lasted from 1701 to 1714, was a major conflict that shaped the future of Europe. Sparked by the death of Spain's last Habsburg king, Charles II, and his controversial will, the war became a fierce struggle over who would control Spain's vast empire. France, led by Louis XIV, sought to secure his grandson's claim to the throne, while a coalition of European powers, including Britain, Austria, and the Dutch Republic, fought to prevent a Franco-Spanish superpower. In this video, we'll explore the key battles, alliances, and outcomes of this war that forever altered Europe's balance of power. In 1659, peace between France and Spain was achieved with the Treaty of the Pyrenees, which included the marriage of French King Louis XIV and Spanish Infanta Maria Teresa. Louis XIV began a war to seize Spanish territory in the Low Countries and concluded a confidential treaty with Emperor Ludwig I of Austria, allowing him to succeed to the Spanish throne and the southern Netherlands for France. However, the arrangement was spoiled when Carlos II lived longer than expected, and diplomatic tensions and intermittent wars complicated the situation. In 1688, William of Orange replaced James II as King of England, and England and Holland agreed to guarantee Emperor Leopold would succeed if he had no heir. The 9 Years' War began in 1689 and ended with the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697. A partition treaty was agreed between France, Holland, and England in 1698, providing Joseph Ferdinand Wittelsbach as the heir to the throne in Madrid. However, the Spanish nobility wanted the empire not divided, and Carlos II signed a new will leaving the throne to young Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria. Louis XIV promoted French interests, particularly that of the king's second grandson, Philippe Duc d'Anjou, as an eligible successor. In November 1776, Louis XIV publicly declared himself as the new king of Spain, causing a dramatic scene at Versailles. The French ambassador in London, Tallard, could write to Versailles that William III and the States General in The Hague would recognize Philip V as King of Spain. Philip V traveled to Naples in September 1701, but the reception was not warm due to the maritime powers, England and Holland's unwillingness to go to war for the sake of an Austrian archduke. Despite this, Philip V was widely recognized as the legitimate King of Spain. Only in Vienna was this denied. In February 1701, French troops were sent to occupy the principal towns in the Spanish Netherlands, with Governor-General Maximilien Emmanuel Wittelsbach's consent. The French campaign was intended to protect King Philip V, but it resulted in significant offense to the Dutch. Towns providing the States General with their barrier, a safeguard against future French aggression, were passed into the hands of Louis XIV's soldiers without a shot being fired. The Dutch garrisons in Luxembourg, Namur, Mons, Charleroi, Oudenarde, ATH, and Nieuport were rounded up and interned. The towns of Liège, Huy, and Roermond came under French influence when the Prince Bishop of Liège allied himself to France. The French Revolution in 1701 led to a reforged alliance between England, Holland, and Austria. The Dutch were more in danger of French aggression, and both maritime powers were shut out of trade with the Spanish Empire. This led to the need for a new alliance, which was authorized by William III to seek allies in the worsening atmosphere. The Grand Alliance was formed between England, Holland, and Austria, signed on the 7th of September, 1701. Denmark and the German states were sought and gained through subsidiary treaties, with Denmark's aid secured due to the influence of Princess Anne's Danish husband Prince George, and Charles XII of Sweden's disassociation from Louis XIV and his plans. Louis XIV's repeated diplomatic errors infuriated London against France and led to renewed war. The Treaty of Grand Alliance was signed, but it was not until this time that the economic damage was felt. The announcement that English-manufactured goods would no longer be allowed to be exported to France further fueled tensions. The Peace Party in England, led by the Tories, was losing ground in Parliament. The appeal to the king was designed to avoid civil war and religious strife, while promoting the peaceful Protestant succession to the throne. Supplies for the rebuilding of the army and navy were promptly voted, and preparations for renewed war were made. The Earl of Marlborough was sent as the Queen's ambassador to The Hague, where the French ambassador was making mischief and trying to undermine Dutch ministers. A state of war with France and the French prince in Spain was declared by the parties to the Grand Alliance on 15 May 1702. In the early stages of the war, Louis XIV had a significant advantage due to his central position and well-equipped army. His allies in Bavaria and Savoy welcomed French troops, while the French alliance with Portugal secured the Atlantic seaboard of Spain. The River Rhine provided a barrier for France and German princes and electors supporting the Grand Alliance. The Margrave of Baden, Louis Guillaume, had gained a reputation fighting the Ottoman armies in Eastern Europe. Marshal Catinat resigned, and Marshal Boufflers was sent north with a 60,000-strong army to attack Holland. In northern Italy, Marshal Villeroy faced Prince Eugene's army, who formed a plan to seize the fortified city of Cremona. The French had a significant advantage at sea, as the ports of Spain and Italy were open to Louis XIV's ships, but closed to those of the maritime powers. The maritime powers aimed to open a new front against France and Philip V, obtaining valuable ports for future operations, hindering Spanish and French trade, and laying open the Catalan, Valencian, and Andalusian coastline. On 26 August, the Allied landing in the bay north of Cadiz was successful, with little opposition. The small town of Rota was occupied the next day, and a proclamation asserting the rights of Archduke Charles over the Spanish throne was read out. The operation was abandoned on 26 September, causing significant damage to the prospects for a successful Allied campaign in southern Spain. The cause of Charles III became associated with the scandalous conduct of Ormond's troops, who plundered Santa Maria, sacked churches, and raped women and nuns. The Spanish treasure fleet arrived off the coast of Galicia, and Rooke successfully entered Vigo Bay, capturing 6 transports, 3 Spanish ships, and 11 other transports. This was a major blow to France and her hopes of mounting an effective naval campaign. Philip V appropriated 7 million silver pesos to finance his campaign to hold on to the throne in Madrid. In 1702, Methuen tried to force the issue by offering territorial concessions to Portugal in Extremadura and Galicia, along with generous cash subsidies and provision of supplies for troops on the campaign in return for active support of the Grand Alliance. In 1702, French Marshal Louis-François de Boufflers attempted to defeat the Dutch army in the Low Countries, hoping to strike before Queen Anne's troops could assemble. The Grand Alliance was in disarray, with Louis XIV and his grandson in Madrid soon victorious. Boufflers established his main force at Xanten, where he could observe the Dutch army, commanded by Godert Rede van Ginkel. However, his campaign lost some of its spark and neglected to seize the Dutch fortress of Maastricht. On the 30th of June, 1702, the Earl of Marlborough arrived to take command of the 60,000-strong Anglo-Dutch army. Marlborough believed an early and forthright move to drive the French back was necessary, but some Dutch generals were more cautious. The Allied army laid formal siege to Venlo, Stevensweert, and Roermond, and Liege fell to the Allies at the end of October. The 1703 campaign in the Low Countries began with an attack on the French garrison in Bonn, which held out for 12 days before being forced to capitulate. The Duke of Marlborough combined with Dutch troops under Veldmarschall Overkerk to seize the ports of Antwerp and Ostend. However, General Optim's premature advance left him in an exposed position and without close support. In 1703, Marlborough faced little success against Antwerp and returned to the Meuse to lay siege to Huy, aiming to threaten the French-held fortress of Namur. The French commander, the Marquis de Millon, capitulated on the 26th of August, and the 900 French troops taken prisoner were later exchanged for 2 Allied battalions lost earlier in the campaign. French commanders gained ground elsewhere, with the Elector of Bavaria openly allying himself to Louis XIV, causing a strategic shift in the war. A sharp engagement between Bavarian and Imperial forces took place on the 4th of March, 1703, at the village of Heisenpirn. Marshal Claude Louis Hector de Villars seized Kehl and took his army through the Black Forest to support the Elector of Bavaria's operations on the Danube. Louis XIV wrote to Villars, stating that the success of the war depended on his ally, Louis XIV. Victor Amadeus II of Savoy wavered in his support for Louis XIV in the war, and his discontent with Vendôme's conduct was tempered when Victor Amadeus chose to abandon his alliance with France. The fortunes of the French and Bavarian operations on the Rhine and in southern Germany appeared to be prospering, but this was an illusion. In 1704, the Duke of Marlborough led a significant military maneuver to break free from Dutch restraining forces in Vienna. He persuaded Queen Anne to send his troops to southern Germany, ensuring the safety of Dutch troops. Marlborough crossed from England to The Hague and announced his intention to campaign against the Marquis de Bedmar in the Moselle Valley. The Dutch agreed to the enterprise, and 19,000 troops began their march southwards. Marshal Villeroy, the French commander in the Low Countries, was puzzled by Marlborough's speed and appealed to Louis XIV for advice. Marlborough crossed the Rhine to the east bank of the Rhine, deploying around 40,000 troops to outmatch French columns. Louis XIV instructed Tallard to join Marsin and the Elector on the Danube, while Villeroy remained with his troops to hold Alsace secure. In 1704, Marlborough met Prince Eugene of Savoy and Margrave of Baden. They planned to hold the lines of Stollhofen on the Rhine to prevent French reinforcements from being sent to Bavaria. They planned to combine forces and force the Danube line, interposing armies between Vienna and the French and Bavarians. Donauworth, a crucial forward base, was defended by a 12,000-strong French and Bavarian corps under Captain Jean d'Arco. Despite heavy losses, Marlborough could now move across the Danube and interpose the Allied army between the French and Bavarians and the Emperor in Vienna. Marlborough and Baden entered Bavaria to attack the Elector of Bavaria, but negotiations failed, leading to a campaign of destruction across the Bavarian countryside. The campaign aimed to pressure the Elector to come to terms, but the Elector remained steadfast in his alliance with the French. The arrival of a fresh French army in Bavaria on the 6th of August checked Marlborough's campaign, and it seemed that the Duke would soon have to withdraw into central Germany to sustain his troops. Prince Eugene had not been able to prevent Tallard's march through the Black Forest, and by the 6th of August, he had encamped with his 18,000 troops on the north bank of the Danube near the village of Hochstadt. Marlborough and Eugene crossed the Danube River to support Eugene, and the Allied armies successfully combined at Munster. On the 13th of August, 1704, Marlborough and Eugene surprised and attacked the French and Bavarians in their camp, destroying Tallard's cavalry, inflicting 20,000 casualties, and taking 13,000 unwounded prisoners. The Franco-Bavarian campaign was in ruins, and Louis XIV's main strategic effort to win the war was in ruins. Marlborough and Eugene suffered severe casualties with around 12,000 killed and wounded. In 1703, Louis XIV needed troop reinforcement to secure his grandson's position in Madrid. James Fitzjames, the English-born Duke of Berwick, was appointed as Captain General of the French and Spanish armies in Spain. However, the Spanish soldiers were brave but ill-equipped, poorly paid, and their training outdated. Rivalries between ambitious people at the court added to Berwick's difficulties. King Pedro of Portugal joined the Grand Alliance, and Archduke Charles arrived in Lisbon on the 6th of March, 1704, with 4,000 British and Dutch troops. The French ambassador failed to take control of the situation, resulting in valuable time lost in testing officers' patience. The Duke of Berwick began his campaign to drive Lisbon out of the war, sending 5 columns of French and Spanish troops across the border. On July 30, 1704, the Allied fleet crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, capturing the island for Archduke Charles. The British garrison in Gibraltar was repaired and strengthened, opening a passage into Your Majesty of Spain. The bombardment by Spanish and French gunners dwindled, and the force commanded by Villadarius was reduced to fewer than 6,400 men. Marshal Tess replaced Marquis de Villadarius and Admiral Pointus, but fresh attempts to storm the defenses proved fruitless. Leake resupplied the Allied garrison in late March, inflicting a damaging local defeat on the French squadron. Archduke Charles boarded Shovel's squadron with Peterborough as the commander-in-chief, sailing from the Tagus on the 26th of July, 1705. The expedition aimed to seize Barcelona and raise Catalonia for Charles's cause, but faced challenges due to the lack of a formal siege train. After the defeat of the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene at Blenheim in 1704, French armies were rebuilt, but the Grand Alliance faced disappointment in 1705 due to Emperor Leopold's death. Emperor Joseph trusted the Duke of Marlborough and ordered the Prince of Baden to act in concert on the Moselle. Louis XIV and his grandson in Madrid had to stand on the defensive, surrendering the initiative to their opponents. Marlborough's army, led by Marshal Villars, gathered strength in the Eifel region and reached Maastricht by the 27th of June. Villeroy's siege of the Liège citadel was successful, but Triers was abandoned. The French field army had to cross the 60-mile-long lines of Brabant, but were severely defeated at Elixheim. Marlborough went to Vienna to discuss the ruined army and concerns about the Grand Alliance's fortunes. Villeroy's defeat in the Spanish Low Countries led to French interests in northwestern Europe, and the loss of a valuable part of the Spanish Empire. In 1706, the Grand Alliance faced a significant error in imposing a settlement and scattering favors on the French king, Louis XIV. Prince Eugene joined the army after a defeat at Calcinado by Duc de Vendôme. Eugene managed to maintain order and discipline but faced two armies instead of just one. Louis XIV decided to keep Eugene at bay, while Marshal de la Feuillade attacked Turin, defended by Victor Amadeus's army and imperial troops. Vendôme took up a defensive posture on the river Adige, but news of the catastrophe for French arms at Ramillies in the southern Netherlands, and the destruction of Marshal Villeroy's army at the hands of the Duke of Marlborough, led to an urgent command from Versailles. Eugene crossed the Adige at Rovogo, outflanking the waiting French army holding the line of the river. Marshal Ferdinand Marsan assumed command of the French army covering operations against Turin. On 7 September 1706, Eugene ordered a general attack, and Prussian troops broke through the French position on the right. The French victory in 1706 was a significant event in the history of the Grand Alliance, resulting in 9,000 French casualties and 5,000 Allied deaths. Negotiations were opened confidentially to find a means to conclude a peace satisfactory to all parties, but little progress was made due to the ambitions of the Allies now greatly inflated by their successes. In 1706, Philip V attempted to recapture Barcelona, despite advice from his grandfather in Versailles. Marshal Berwick was sent back to Spain and arrived in Madrid on the 12th of March. He ordered troops to concentrate on holding the line in Estremadura, fearing that the concentration of French and Spanish troops would leave Madrid exposed to an Anglo-Dutch attack. The French Mediterranean fleet anchored off the port, and General Legal arrived with 9,000 troops. Philip V and Marshal Tesse joined him, bypassing Allied garrisons in Saragossa and Lerida. The siege of Barcelona quickly became a broken-backed enterprise, with the Franco-Spanish army under constant harassment from Catalan irregulars. On the 11th of May, Philip V and his commanders abandoned their guns, stores, and soldiers traveling through southern France. In April 1706, Galway and Das Minas advanced from Campo Mayor to threaten Madrid, facing Marshal Berwick and his poorly equipped Spanish soldiers. After a 4-day siege, both Berwick and Das Minas came close to being captured. John Methuen protested the consequences of inaction and commanded the Marquess to retire English forces in Portugal and not continue paying subsidies for the troops of His Majesty. In 3 months, Galway and Das Minas managed to maneuver Berwick away from Madrid, resulting in heavy losses in guns, stores, and equipment. In 1707, the Allies secured Alicante, Majorca, Ibiza, and Cartagena for Philip V's cause. However, the people of Madrid rose in support of Philip V, leading to the reoccupation of Toledo and Salamanca by French and Spanish troops. The Allies withdrew to Chinchon, where Lieutenant General de Valais entered the capital with a strong force of French cavalry. Galway maintained his position at Chinchon, and the Allied army began to withdraw to Valencia. Philip V re-entered Madrid on the 4th of October, receiving a warm reception. In 1707, Berwick regained the initiative and successfully recovered ground lost in the campaign. However, Austria's hopes were still alive, and Emperor Joseph concluded a confidential agreement with France, bringing active hostilities in Italy to a close. Galway and Das Minas took the offensive before their opponents could be substantially reinforced, laying siege to Villena and confronting the 25,000 French and Spanish troops at Almanza. The Allied army fell back in disorder towards Valencia with insufficient strength to defend the region. The siege of Zatava was cautious, and the French had to march 60 miles upstream to Caspe in Aragon. The French then attacked Alicante, but the citadel held out with an English and Huguenot garrison commanded by Major General John Richards. Louis XIV, tired of war, remained obstinate due to France's central position and formidable armies. The Ottomans might renew their threat to Vienna, and the volatile Swedish king, King Charles V of Sweden, could make mischief for France's benefit. Charles remained with his victorious troops in Saxony through the winter, and the possibility of war with Imperial Austria grew more likely due to allegations of Vienna's ill treatment of Protestants in Silesia. The Duke of Marlborough expressed concern about Charles XIV's campaigning season, and met him at Altenstadt in April 1707. They agreed on the main points under discussion, and Marlborough offered inducements to Charles V's ministers. The Duke left Charles V, paid a courtesy call to Frederick Wilhelm, king in Prussia, and returned to Brussels, having achieved a diplomatic coup. Emperor Joseph focused on making gains in southern Italy, which did little favor to the cause of the emperor's younger brother in Spain. Marlborough campaigned in Flanders and wrote to Secretary of State Robert Harley in London, but these appeals were fruitless. The agreement reached between France and Austria effectively demilitarized northern Italy, but imperial forces could still occupy Naples. Duke Victor Amadeus II of Savoy and Prince Eugene agreed to attack Toulon, a port dependent on cash subsidies from London and The Hague. The French ambassador alerted the French ambassador, and Eugene's army met Admiral Shovel's cruising squadron off Nice on July 11th. Despite concerns for supply and communication, Eugene remained cautious and defended Fort St. Catherine. French troops recaptured St. Catherine in a well-handled attack, but desertions, sickness, and a lack of provisions weakened the Allied army. Eugene and Victor Amadeus decided to withdraw while their army was still in one piece. The Allied army began the long march back out of French territory. London took advantage of this fact. Louis XIV attempted a speculative raid into Great Britain, led by James Stuart, the Jacobite pretender to the throne in London. The speculative adventure to Scotland proved more troublesome for the French than the British and their Dutch allies. French Admiral Bourbon managed to slip past the blockading squadron and made for the shores of the north of Scotland, but it was a humiliating failure for the Jacobite cause. The Grand Alliance faced challenges in the campaign due to the Duc de Vendôme's illegitimate lineage and resistance to others' opinions. The Grand Alliance's outlook was not promising due to the failure at Toulon in 1707. Prince Eugene was appointed as commander-in-chief, but this was not realistic due to the Dutch's distance and reluctance. Earl Stanhope was appointed to command British troops in Catalonia, but discipline was not always the best. Despite the lack of supplies, the British and Dutch naval squadrons dominated the seas, and there was flexibility in how the Allies operated between the eastern seaboard of Spain, Gibraltar, the Balearic Islands, and Italy. The Duke of Marlborough urged Stanhope to take Port Mahon and gain possession of Minorca, which was an aspiration of the maritime powers. Stanhope assembled a force of 1,700 British, Catalan, and Portuguese troops to take Minorca, focusing on Port Mahon. The Dutch were resentful of British encroachment and gains, but their demands for a much-enlarged barrier earned them no friends. Vendôme's army needed to be engaged and defeated in the Low Countries, and internal tensions in the empire impeded Eugene's march northwards. Marlborough managed to overtake the French at Lessines and inflict a serious defeat on Vendôme and the Duc de Bourgogne. Marlborough faced a dilemma as Eugene's troops arrived in Flanders. Marshal Berwick arrived and French soldiers had suffered losses at Oudenarde. Marlborough's generals focused on the French fortress of Lille, which was an enormous undertaking. Marshal Boufflers was sent by the king to command the garrison in Lille, and a valuable convoy of guns and ammunition arrived safely through to Menin. Archduke Charles offered Marlborough the appointment of Governor-General of the Spanish Netherlands, but Marlborough declined due to Dutch objections. Allied cavalry raided the border region of northern France, and Louis XIV protested the enemy's demands for contributions. Marlborough and Eugene seized horses and draft animals to assist in the siege of Lille. The French king, Louis XIV, was disappointed by the loss of a crucial fortress, but the valiant defense of Marshal Boufflers brought the Allied campaign to a standstill for over 4 months. The siege was just the opening act in a prolonged passage of arms that would save France from invasion and disaster over the next 4 years. In 1709, frost and cold weather in northwestern Europe led to widespread damage to crops, livestock, and soldiers. The war left France in desperate straits, with soldiers unpaid, northern regions invaded, and crops devastated. Spanish people faced food shortages, leading Philip V to open all Spanish ports to traders. Louis XIV needed peace, but negotiations with the Grand Alliance were slow. An informal truce was established along the Spanish-Portuguese border to resume trade and agriculture. However, Louis XIV rejected it, leading to chaos and the war continuing. In 1710, the Spanish campaign in Aragon began, with Allied commanders taking advantage of their newfound strength. Holland was exhausted by the conflict and sought a new treaty, the Barrier Treaty, signed in October 1709. The Allied campaign in Flanders continued, but Louis XIV regretted the loss of places. Philip V's fortunes were bleak after repeated defeats at Almenara, Saragossa, and Madrid. Louis XIV had to intervene or risk ruining French interests in Spain. Negotiations with the Grand Alliance representatives were suspended in July, and Duc de Vendôme was sent to lead the campaign in the peninsula. Von Starhemberg was, well, reluctant to winter his soldiers in Castile due to exposed lines of supply and communication to Catalonia. Philip V re-entered Madrid on the 6th of December and joined Vendôme on the campaign. Von Starhemberg combined forces with Stanhope at Chinchon, and the Allied army withdrew towards Catalonia in 3 separate columns. The British detachment was overtaken at Brihuega on the 8th of December, and Vendôme's victory was welcomed but had nearly 1,300 casualties. In 1711, Vendôme clashed with von Starhemberg and the main Allied army at Villaviciosa, resulting in heavy combat and the loss of many heavy guns. Philip V's report to his grandfather read, "The debris of the enemy retired in much haste, licking their wounds." The Allied efforts to re-establish their position in Catalonia were hindered by a lack of money. John Campbell, appointed by Queen Anne, found that promised funds were not available to supply the troops. The war spread to the New World in 1711, with a fresh force prepared to attack the settlements of the Five Nations in Quebec. In April 1711, secret negotiations between France and Great Britain led to a treaty for a cessation of hostilities, with the intention of Philip V remaining in Madrid. The succession in Spain was settled on 17 April 1711, with Archduke Charles likely to be elected in Vienna. The Spanish Empire was divided, with large areas of the Low Countries in Italy in Allied and Austrian hands. Philip V was secure in Madrid, and the Archduke was elected as Emperor Charles VI on 2 October 1711. The Grand Alliance faced numerous defeats and setbacks during the war, including the siege of Landrecies and the capture of 5,000 Allied soldiers. The Treaty of Utrecht established peace between Great Britain and France, Savoy and Prussia, and France and Holland. Austria tried to fight alone to gain better terms, and Villars raided imperial lands in Germany and began a siege of Freiburg, leading to the surrender of the Marquis de Biron and the Marquis de Biron. The final act of the war for Spain took place in Catalonia, where the people held firm allegiance to Archduke Charles. The Treaty of Utrecht stipulated that a general amnesty would be offered once Allied troops had left Catalonia. Philip V acquiesced to his grandfather's wishes and agreed with the Dutch. The fall of Barcelona led to the suspension of all Catalonian rights, and the region remained under martial law for many years. Majorca, the last bastion of resistance to Philip V, only submitted to French troops commanded by the Chevalier d'Asfeld in June 1715, but no attempt was made to recover Minorca from the British, as this had been agreed upon under the treaty terms. In the 17th century, Western Europe saw France gain dominance over neighboring states under the rule of Louis XIV. Spain's military success led to fragmented opposition and weakened ruling classes. Austria was concerned with the Ottoman threat, and unrest in Hungary caught the attention of Vienna. The Holy Roman Empire was fragmented and irrelevant, with smaller states being prey to the power and aspirations of others. Protestant Holland gained independence from Spain after a long war, and France was eager to weaken Spanish influence. Louis XIV attacked the small new republic, but the Salt Sea saved the Dutchmen. This new combination of Protestant powers in Northern Europe, under King William III, combined with the weight and effort of Brandenburg and Denmark, created a theoretical power bloc capable of challenging Catholic France. A truce was agreed in 1697, but the throne vacated by King Carlos II led to an unwelcome renewal of outright war. The division of the old Spanish Empire between rival claimants to the throne, as sought at the creation of the Grand Alliance in 1702, resulted in Great Britain gaining significant trade opportunities and valuable ports. The British also gained their Protestant succession, with George, the Elector of Hanover, peacefully succeeding to the throne on the death of Queen Anne. Despite the attention given to his Hanoverian interests, the British turned their backs on Europe and pursued a worldwide future based on a trading empire underpinned by almost unchallenged maritime power. Holland's eyes were fixed on the maintenance of her sea power. German princes, particularly Prussia, eventually coalesced to form a dominant power in Europe. Vienna, which had gained gains in the southern Netherlands and Italy, turned away to deal with the latent Ottoman threat and intrigue in Eastern Europe. However, sustained Austrian military success was uneven, and King Charles XII of Sweden took his fine army off to destruction in Russia, never again a serious factor in European history. Spain entered a period of relative peace and prosperity after the War of the Spanish Succession, with an outwardly united country with a popular young king. The war had a significant impact on the Spanish people, as they were unable to fully support themselves on the produce of the region through which it moved. The France of Louis XIV, arguably the main player in the disputed succession, was left exhausted financially and militarily by the enormous efforts expended to secure the throne for d'Anjou. The reduction in French power, influence and prestige was a notable and beneficial turning point in European history, establishing once more a kind of balance of power that had been lost with the breaking up of the empire of Charles V many years before. The treaties to end the war for Spain, arranged between 1713 and 1715, may be viewed dispassionately and in their entirety as a good thing. The War of the Spanish Succession, from 1701 to 1714, was a defining conflict that reshaped Europe's political landscape. While it ended with Philip V, Louis XIV's grandson, retaining the Spanish throne, the treaties of Utrecht and Rastatt ensured Spain and France would remain separate powers, preserving the balance of power in Europe. The war marked the rise of Britain as a global maritime force and set the stage for future colonial dominance. Ultimately, it underscored the immense costs of dynastic ambitions and alliances, leaving a legacy of diplomacy and conflict that would influence European politics for centuries to come.